She saved a Lakota warrior after Little Bighorn. 3 days later, he left her something priceless. The land was unusually quiet in the days after the great clash near the Little Bighorn River. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Smoke no longer rose into the sky, yet the feeling of fear and uncertainty still hung over the plains. Nothing felt settled. Nothing felt finished. She lived alone in a small wooden cabin not far from a narrow creek. Her name had little meaning beyond the nearby settlements, and few people traveled close to her land anymore. Most families had packed up and left when news spread that fighting had broken out between the U.S. soldiers and the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Those who stayed kept their doors locked and their lamps low at night. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. Her husband had passed away 2 winters earlier, taken by illness during a long, bitter cold season. Since then, she had learned to survive on her own. She chopped her own firewood, grew what food she could, and traded quietly with passing travelers when they still came. Life on the frontier had already taught her loss, patience, and silence. On the 3rd morning after the distant thunder of conflict had faded, she stepped outside just after sunrise. The sky was pale blue, streaked with soft clouds. For a moment the land looked peaceful again, almost kind. She carried a small bucket, planning to gather water from the creek before the day grew hot. As she walked, she noticed signs that others had passed through the area. Trampled grass, broken branches, footprints that did not belong to animals. Her steps slowed. Every sound seemed louder now. The call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, her own breathing. She told herself to turn back, but something pulled her forward. Near the edge of the creek, partially hidden by reeds and tall grass, she saw a shape that did not belong there. At first she thought it might be a fallen tree or a pile of old clothing. Then she saw movement, slow, weak. A man lay there, barely stirring. Her heart began to race. She knew immediately who he was, or at least what side he belonged to. His clothing, though torn and dusty, marked him as a Lakota warrior. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his breathing shallow. He looked young, but hardship had aged him beyond his years. Fear washed over her. Everything she had been told warned her to run. People said the land was no longer safe. They said helping an enemy would bring ruin. They said soldiers were searching the area and settlers were on edge, ready to accuse first and ask questions later. She stood frozen, torn between instinct and conscience. If she left him there, nature would decide his fate. The sun would rise higher, the air would grow dry. No one else was likely to come. If she helped him, she risked everything, her home, her safety, even her life. She looked at his face again. He was no threat in that moment. He was simply a human being, worn down and struggling to remain awake. His eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused, then closed again. He did not speak. He did not reach for anything. He barely moved at all. Something inside her softened. She thought of her husband, of how helpless he had looked in his final days. She remembered how she had wished someone, anyone, could ease his suffering. Standing there by the creek, she felt that same pull she had felt then. A quiet voice inside her said she could not walk away. She knelt beside the man, keeping her distance at first. She spoke softly, not knowing if he could understand her words. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. She told him he was not alone. She told him to stay still. He did not respond, but his breathing steadied slightly, as if he sensed he was no longer abandoned. Helping him was not easy. He was heavier than he looked, and every movement had to be careful. She used what strength she had, inch by inch, guiding him away from the open creek bank. Each sound made her flinch. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see riders in the distance. None came. By the time she reached her cabin, her arms ached and her legs shook. She led him around the back where no one traveling the main path could see. Beneath the cabin was a small root cellar, dug into the earth and hidden by a wooden door. It was cool, dark, and rarely used now that summer had arrived. It would have to do. She helped him inside and laid him down on a bed of old blankets and sacks. The space smelled of soil and dried vegetables, but it was safe. For now. She climbed back up, her hands trembling as she closed the door. Inside the cabin she paced. Her thoughts raced faster than her feet. What had she done? If anyone found out, there would be questions she could not answer. She could already imagine the looks, the whispers, the anger. Still, she did not regret it. She gathered water, clean cloth, and the few basic supplies she owned. She had learned enough over the years to tend to sickness and exhaustion. She worked slowly, carefully, speaking gently whenever she returned to the cellar. Though they did not share a common language, her tone carried meaning. He listened, even when his eyes stayed closed. Outside, the world remained tense. Riders passed in the distance. Voices, sometimes carried on the wind. Each time, she paused, holding her breath until the sounds faded. She kept her routine as normal as possible, stepping outside only when necessary. By nightfall, the plains were quiet again. Stars filled the sky, bright and endless. She sat by her small window, watching shadows move across the land. Below her feet, the man slept, still breathing, still alive. She did not know what would come next. All she knew was that the battle had ended, but something else had begun. Something small, hidden, and fragile. A choice made in silence. A moment of mercy in a time ruled by fear. Morning arrived slowly, bringing pale light through the small cabin window. She had not slept much. Every sound during the night had pulled her from shallow rest. The cry of a distant animal, the wind brushing the walls, the creak of old wood settling each time her thoughts returned to the man hidden beneath her floor. When the sun finally rose, she took a deep breath and forced herself to move. Fear would not help now. Careful action would. She prepared a small meal for herself but barely touched it. Her hands kept drifting back to the supplies she had set aside the night before. Clean cloth, water, a few dried herbs she trusted. When she felt steady enough, she opened the cellar door just a little and peered down. The man was still alive. His breathing was slow but more even than before. His face was still pale with strain, but the tightness around his eyes had eased. She felt a quiet sense of relief wash over her. It did not erase the danger, but it gave her strength to continue. She moved carefully, making sure the door stayed hidden from the outside. Then she climbed down and knelt beside him. Up close, she could see how worn he was. Dust clung to his hair and skin. There were marks from long days without rest, and signs of injury that had not been treated. She did not look too closely at everything at once. She focused on what she could help. She spoke softly as she worked, more for herself than for him. She told him the morning had come. She told him he was safe for now. Her words were simple, calm, and steady. He stirred slightly. His eyes opened, and this time they stayed open longer. Dark eyes met hers, filled with confusion and caution. His body tensed as if he expected harm. She froze, then slowly raised her hands to show she meant no danger. She shook her head gently and spoke again in a low voice. Though he could not understand the words, he understood the tone. After a long moment, his shoulders relaxed. He did not speak, but he did not pull away either. That was enough. She offered him water, lifting the cup slowly so he could see it. He hesitated, then drank in small sips. When he was finished, she nodded and set it aside. The rest of the morning passed in careful movements. She cleaned what she could and wrapped fresh cloth where needed. She worked quietly, listening for any sounds above them. Each time footsteps or voices passed far away, she paused, heart pounding, until silence returned. He watched her closely. Sometimes his eyes followed her every movement. Other times they drifted shut, exhaustion pulling him back into sleep. When he woke again, she was there, steady and calm. Though they shared no common language, small signs of understanding began to form. A nod, a glance, a pause that meant, wait, or, it is all right. These small moments built trust more strongly than words ever could. Outside, the land remained uneasy. Riders came and went. Smoke rose from distant camps. The memory of the battle still weighed on the plains. People were searching for survivors, for answers, for something to blame. She knew she had to be careful. She went about her daily tasks as if nothing had changed. She fetched water. She tended her small garden. She kept her head down when anyone passed nearby. To anyone watching, she was just a quiet woman trying to survive another day. Inside, everything had changed. By afternoon, the heat grew stronger. She brought cool water down to the cellar and placed it within his reach. When she turned to leave, she felt his hand lightly touch her sleeve. She looked back, surprised. He pointed to himself, then to her, then pressed his hand briefly against his chest. His expression was serious, respectful. It was not a demand. It was not fear. It was thanks. She did not fully understand the gesture, but she understood the feeling behind it. She nodded once, then gently removed her sleeve and climbed back up. As evening came, clouds gathered on the horizon. The sky darkened and the air cooled. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. She welcomed the sound. Rain would keep people inside. Rain would hide tracks. That night she brought him a small portion of food. He ate slowly, carefully, as if he had not eaten properly in days. When he finished, he rested back against the wall, eyes closing again. She sat on the cellar steps for a long time after, listening to his breathing. She thought about how strange it was that two people from such different worlds could share such a quiet space. Everything around them spoke of division, yet here, beneath her home, there was only shared survival. Before closing the door, she whispered that she would return in the morning. The second day passed much like the first, but with subtle changes. He was stronger now. He could sit up on his own. His eyes were clearer. When she spoke, he listened closely, as if memorizing the sound of her voice. At one point, he spoke softly in his own language. She did not understand the words, but his tone was gentle, thoughtful. He gestured as if telling a story, something about the land, or his people, or the path that had brought him there. She listened anyway. She realized then that fear had blinded so many people on both sides. Fear made enemies out of strangers. Fear erased stories and turned lives into symbols instead of human beings. Here, in this small, hidden space, fear slowly loosened its grip. But danger had not vanished. Late that afternoon, she heard voices much closer than before. Horses, boots, men speaking sharply. She froze, every muscle tense. She moved quietly to the window and peered out. A small group of men had stopped not far from her cabin. They were scanning the land, searching. One of them pointed toward the creek. Her heart pounded. She returned to the cellar and pressed her finger to her lips. The man understood instantly. He remained still, silent, his eyes alert. The minutes stretched endlessly. She stood above, barely breathing, listening as the men talked, then argued, then finally moved on. When the sound faded, she sank into a chair, shaken but relieved. That night, she did not go down right away. She waited until she was certain the land was quiet again. When she finally opened the cellar door, the man looked up at her with understanding in his eyes. He knew now what she was risking. He spoke again, softly, placing his hand over his heart and bowing his head slightly. She did not need words to understand what he meant. The third morning approached, and with it, an unspoken truth. He could not stay much longer. Each day he grew stronger, and each day the danger increased. Neither of them said it aloud, but both of them felt it. The third day began before the sun rose. The sky was still dark, and the air carried a cool stillness that made every sound feel closer than it was. She woke with a sense of urgency she could not explain. Something felt different. Not wrong, but heavy, like the quiet moment before a storm. She sat up in bed and listened. Nothing. No voices. No hooves. Only the distant call of a bird, welcoming the coming light. She dressed quickly and moved through the cabin with care. Before doing anything else, she opened the cellar door just enough to look inside. The man was awake, sitting upright now, his back against the wall. He looked stronger than he had the day before, though weariness still lingered in his eyes. They looked at each other for a long moment. There was understanding in that silence. This was no longer just about hiding or healing. Time was pressing in on them both. She climbed down and handed him water. He drank, then set the cup aside. For the first time, he tried to stand. He moved slowly, testing his balance. She watched closely, ready to help, but he managed on his own. It surprised her. He was still weak, but no longer helpless. She felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Helping him had become part of her days, part of her purpose. Letting that go would not be easy. They shared a simple meal in quiet. He ate carefully, then wrapped his blanket tighter around himself. Afterward, he reached into a small pouch tied to his clothing and pulled out a thin strip of leather. He ran his fingers over it thoughtfully, as if it held memory. He looked up and spoke again in his language, slowly, calmly. He pointed toward the plains, then to the horizon, then to the ground beneath them. Though she did not understand the words, she understood the meaning. He was telling her where he came from. She listened, nodding gently. When he finished, she placed her hand briefly over her heart, then gestured around the cellar and the cabin above. It was her way of saying this place, this moment, mattered to her too. As the morning passed, she grew more alert to the sounds outside. The land did not feel empty anymore. It felt watched. She went outside to gather water, keeping her movements slow and natural. As she walked, she noticed fresh tracks near the creek, boot prints, not days old. Her chest tightened. They were getting closer. She returned quickly but calmly, masking her fear behind steady steps. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. When she went back down to the cellar, she told him with her eyes what her words could not. The danger was growing. Staying any longer would risk both their lives. He listened carefully, his face serious. He nodded once, slowly. He had known this day would come. The rest of the day passed in preparation, though neither of them said that was what they were doing. She washed his cloth coverings and gave him clean water. He adjusted his clothing and tested his strength again, walking the small space with care. At one point he reached out and gently touched the wooden wall, then the dirt floor. He closed his eyes for a moment as if memorizing the place. It struck her then that this cellar, hidden and small, would stay with him long after he left. And he would stay with her too. By afternoon, clouds gathered again, but no rain came. The air felt thick and restless. She heard distant voices once more, farther this time but close enough to keep her tense. She spent time above, moving things around the cabin so nothing seemed out of place. She made sure there were no signs of extra use, no dropped cloth, no unusual marks. Every detail mattered. As the sun dipped lower, she returned to the cellar with a lantern. The soft light filled the space, casting long shadows on the walls. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. They sat across from each other, separated by little more than air and circumstance. He spoke again, quietly. This time, his tone was different, slower, deeper. He pointed toward the east, then west, then placed his hand over his heart. His eyes held gratitude, but also resolve. He was saying goodbye. She swallowed hard and nodded. She did not trust her voice. Instead, she stood and retrieved a small bundle she had prepared. Food wrapped carefully, a bit of cloth, and water sealed as best she could. She placed it beside him. He accepted it with both hands and bowed his head slightly. Night fell gently, without warning. Stars appeared one by one, bright against the dark sky. The plains seemed endless and quiet again, but she knew better now than to trust silence. They waited. When the time felt right, when the land seemed to rest instead of watch, she opened the back door of the cabin. Cool air rushed in. The path behind the cabin led away from the main trail, winding through tall grass and uneven ground. It was the safest way. She returned to the cellar and gestured that it was time. He stood, taller now, steadier. For a moment he hesitated. Then he reached into his pouch again, fingers closing around something unseen, but he did not take it out yet. They climbed quietly out of the cellar and into the night. She walked ahead, lantern covered, guiding him along the shadowed path. Every step felt loud in her ears, though they moved without sound. At the edge of the tall grass he stopped. This was as far as she could go. They faced each other beneath the stars. No words passed between them. None were needed. He placed his hand over his heart once more, then reached into his pouch and pulled out a small wrapped item. He held it out to her, his expression solemn. She hesitated. He gently pressed it into her hands. Whatever it was, it mattered. She looked up at him, trying to ask 100 questions with her eyes. He only nodded, then stepped back. Another step, then another. Soon he blended into the darkness, becoming part of the land once more. Within moments, he was gone. She stood there for a long time, holding the small bundle close to her chest. The night felt larger without him, quieter, emptier. When she finally returned to the cabin, she locked the door and sat by the window, watching the stars shift across the sky. She did not open what he had given her. Not yet. Her heart felt heavy, but not with regret. She had done what she believed was right. Outside, the plain stretched endlessly, carrying secrets, stories, and paths that crossed only once in a lifetime. And though the third day had ended with separation, she sensed that what had been shared in those hidden hours would not fade easily. She did not sleep that night. Even after the man disappeared into the darkness, her mind stayed awake, replaying every moment of the past 3 days. The cabin felt different now, too quiet, too still. The space beneath the floor was empty, yet she could almost feel his presence there, like a memory that refused to leave. She sat at the small wooden table with the wrapped item resting in front of her. The lantern burned low, casting a warm glow across the room. She stared at the bundle for a long time, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Part of her feared opening it. Not because she expected danger, but because she sensed it carried meaning. Whatever it was, it marked the end of something, and the beginning of something else. She wanted to hold on to the moment just a little longer, before learning what he had left behind. Outside, the night passed slowly. The wind shifted. An owl called from far away. Everything felt ordinary again, and yet nothing was. As dawn approached, she finally reached for the bundle. Her fingers moved carefully as if the object inside might break under rough touch. She unfolded the cloth layer by layer. Inside, she found something small, worn by time and careful use. It was not bright or flashy. It did not shine like gold or silver. Yet the moment she saw it, she knew it was important. She did not fully understand its history, but she could feel its weight. Not just in her hands, but in her chest. It carried the marks of a life lived with purpose. It was something deeply personal, something no one would give away lightly. He had trusted her with it. She wrapped it back up and held it close for a moment, letting the feeling settle. Whatever the item meant to him, it now connected them beyond words, beyond the short time they had shared. As the sun rose, she forced herself back into routine. Life on the frontier did not pause for reflection. She cleaned the cabin, aired out the cellar, and made sure no signs remained that anyone else had been there. The blankets were folded, the floor swept, the door secured. By mid-morning, riders passed again in the distance. She watched from her window as a small group moved along the trail. They did not stop. They did not look her way. Still, her heart beat faster until they were gone. The land was settling, but not peacefully. Tension lingered like dust after a long march. Later that day, a neighbor she had not seen in weeks stopped by. He spoke of rumors, of searching parties, of anger and fear spreading through the settlements. She listened quietly, offering little in response. She kept her face calm, and her words simple. Nothing about her gave anything away. After he left, she closed the door and leaned against it, her knees weak with relief. She realized then just how close she had come to being discovered, not only hiding a man, but carrying a secret that could change how others saw her forever. That night, she took the wrapped item and hid it carefully beneath a loose floorboard, not out of shame, but out of protection. Some things were not meant for curious eyes. Days passed. The land slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Travelers became fewer, then more again. The creek flowed as it always had. The sun rose and set without concern for human struggles. Yet for her, time had shifted. She found herself thinking of the man often. She wondered if he had reached his people, if his strength had held, if the path she had guided him onto had truly kept him safe. Sometimes when the wind moved just right, she imagined she heard his footsteps in the grass. Other times she caught herself listening for a voice that would never return. She spoke of none of this to anyone. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A trader passed through, stopping briefly to exchange goods. As they talked, he mentioned hearing stories from the northern plains, stories of a wounded warrior who had survived against all odds, stories of help given by someone unseen, someone never named. The trader laughed it off, saying such tales always grew larger with distance. She said nothing, but that night she sat by the fire and allowed herself a small smile. Whether the stories were true or not did not matter. What mattered was that the man had lived long enough to be remembered. As summer deepened, she returned to the object he had left behind more than once. Each time she held it, she felt grounded. It reminded her that even in times shaped by fear and division, quiet acts of kindness could still exist. The object did not bring her wealth. It did not change her standing in the world, but it changed her. She became more patient, more thoughtful, less quick to judge others by rumors or fear. She began to see the land not as a place divided by sides, but as a shared home shaped by many lives and many stories. One evening, months later, as the sky turned orange and gold, she took the object out again. She cleaned it carefully and wrapped it once more in fresh cloth. Then she placed it back beneath the floorboard. It would stay there, safe and hidden, until the day she felt it was meant to be seen again. She did not know when that day would come, but she knew this: what he had given her was not just an item. It was a reminder that compassion could cross lines drawn by conflict, that courage did not always wear a uniform or carry a weapon. Sometimes courage looked like a quiet choice made beside a creek. Sometimes it looked like opening a door when fear told you to close it. The world moved on, as it always did. History would remember battles, leaders, and losses. It would forget small cabins, hidden cellars, and silent moments of mercy. But she would remember. Years passed, slowly and quietly, like the steady flow of the creek beside her cabin. Seasons came and went, each leaving its mark on the land and on her life. The sharp fear that once filled the plains faded, replaced by routine and survival. New families arrived, old ones moved on. The world kept turning as it always did. She grew older. Her hair showed threads of gray. Her hands became rougher, stronger, shaped by work and weather. Yet her eyes held something new now, something calm and knowing. Life no longer felt like a series of threats waiting to appear. It felt like a story unfolding, one step at a time. The object he had left behind remained hidden beneath the floorboard for a long while. She did not take it out often, only on certain nights when the world felt especially quiet, or when memories stirred more strongly than usual. Each time she held it, she felt connected to something larger than herself. It reminded her that history was not only made by loud moments and famous names, it was also shaped by choices made in silence. Over time, people stopped talking about the battle with the same sharp edge. It became something discussed in past tense, something written about rather than feared. Children grew up hearing stories that sounded distant and unreal, like echoes from another world. She rarely spoke of those days, not because she was afraid, but because she knew some stories lost their meaning when spoken too freely. What she had done was not meant for praise or judgment. It was simply something she had done. One autumn afternoon, many years later, a young traveler stopped by her cabin. He was polite, curious, and clearly interested in the history of the land. As they talked, he asked if she had lived there during the time of the great conflict near the river. She nodded. He leaned forward, eager. He spoke of legends he had heard, Stories of survival, of unexpected mercy, of an unnamed woman who had helped someone when it was dangerous to do so. He admitted he did not know if the stories were true, but he found them fascinating. She listened quietly, her face calm. When he finished, she smiled gently and changed the subject. After he left, she sat alone for a long time, thinking about how stories travel, how they shift and soften with time, how truth and imagination often walk side by side. That evening, she took the object out once more. She studied it carefully, the way she had many times before. It was worn now, marked by age, but still strong. It carried the weight of memory and meaning, not because of what it was made of, but because of what it represented. She realized then that keeping it hidden forever was not the right path. Not because she wanted recognition, but because the object itself carried a story worth preserving, a story of connection, of shared humanity in a time of deep division. The next spring, she made a decision. When a small local gathering was held nearby, a place where people shared old tools, letters, and family items from the early days, she brought the object with her. She did not announce its origin, she did not dramatize its history. She simply said it had been given to her long ago, during a difficult time, by someone whose life had crossed hers briefly but meaningfully. Those who saw it sensed its importance right away, not because it was grand, but because it felt honest, real, grounded. Questions were asked. She answered only what she felt comfortable sharing. She did not name names. She did not place herself at the center of the story. She let the object speak for itself. In time, it found a careful home, preserved not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that even in moments shaped by fear and conflict, people could still choose compassion. She returned to her cabin lighter than she had expected. Letting go did not feel like loss, it felt like completion. As the years went on, her world grew smaller but richer. She spent more time sitting by the creek, watching the water move over stones worn smooth by time. She thought often about paths, how people travel them, how they cross, how they separate again. She never learned the man's fate in detail. She did not know how long he lived or what stories he told of his journey, but she believed he survived. She believed he carried his own memories of those days, just as she did. Sometimes she imagined him telling others about a quiet place beneath a wooden cabin, about hands that offered water instead of harm, about a choice that allowed him to walk away and live. That was enough. When she grew too old to manage the cabin on her own, she moved to stay with distant relatives. The land passed into other hands. New walls were built. Old ones fell away. The cellar beneath the floor was filled in over time, its purpose forgotten. But the story did not disappear. It lived on in small ways, in whispered accounts, in preserved items, in the quiet understanding that history was not only shaped by power, but by mercy. She passed away peacefully, surrounded by familiar voices. Those who knew her spoke of her kindness, her strength, her steady nature. They did not know all that she had carried inside her, and that was all right, because some legacies are not meant to be spoken loudly. They are meant to be felt. Long after she was gone, the plains remained. The creek still flowed. The sky still stretched endlessly above the land where two lives once crossed in a moment of quiet courage. And somewhere between memory and history, the truth endured. Not as a grand tale, but as a simple one. A story of a woman who chose compassion when fear would have been easier. A story of a man who honored that choice with trust.